20-ton excavator sinking deeper into a swamp of mud and water. Every second, the water rises higher, threatening to swallow it whole. Another excavator rushes to the rescue, digging frantically to prepare the pull. 6 heavy steel cables stretch to the limit. One snap could kill. At last, a slow, painful shift. The beast starts to move. But will the cables hold, or will the swamp win? Every time we talk about excavator rescues, people always recall one classic scene, the Hulua saving Grandpa on the Yellow River bank. Today, let's watch how a Russian pro-rescue team pulls out a trapped excavator. Here's the moment the team just arrived. The excavator was still soaking in water. Once they got there, the very first task was draining the water. For that drainage, step 1, block the small ditch. That only works if water isn't too much. If water is heavy, pumping won't help. Then you need divers with full gear to dive down and hook chains onto the frame anchors. In this case, they blocked the channel, then pumped the pit dry using water pumps directly. Once dry, they used their own excavator to dig around the stuck machine, right at the frame, the anchor spot, clearing away the mud. When you only rely on machines to dig, the angle is often off. That's why sometimes manual work is needed, using shovels and tools to clear it by hand. As long as the tow anchor point is exposed, the rest becomes much easier. But if the pit can't be fully drained, the real challenge of rescue begins. Step 1. Figure out the exact moving direction of the excavator, meaning the orientation of its tracks. Because once an excavator is trapped and you realize it can't self-rescue, there's no way out by itself. What should you do? First, align the body as straight as possible. Make sure the upper structure matches the direction of the tracks. Second, don't try to use the boom thinking, "I'll stick the bucket into the mud and lift it out." That doesn't work. Just wait for rescue. In China, many rescue cases we've seen, it's not that professional teams don't exist, but most viral examples online are just like that Hulua saving Grandpa style. One common mistake people make is thinking, oh, my small vehicle is stuck. All I need is to bring in something just a little bit bigger, give it a tug, and problem solved. But what they forget is, how will that rescue vehicle even get into the same muddy trap zone? Look at today's rescue, for example. They didn't just send one truck, they brought in 2 different machines, a heavy-duty rescue truck and also an excavator. That rescue truck wasn't empty either. It came with its own mounted crane, carrying steel pipes, a cable drum of heavy wire rope, plus chains, pulleys, and anchors. If no steel pipes were available, they'd substitute with timber. The set of steel pipes you see lowered right now really has one main purpose, to pad and protect under the winch cable. Because once that excavator hooks up and begins pulling uphill, there's a small slope right in front. And without putting wood blocks or those very pipes under it, the cable would cut in and fail the moment you start pulling. Without support, the steel cable just sinks into the mud. That's why you always need to prop it up, lift the rope off the ground. Sometimes, when I'm just browsing online, I see so-called rescue attempts, where they throw on a single steel cable, yank it with all their force, and never bother checking the conditions around. Honestly, that kind of rescue can be summed up in one word. If it works, it's pure luck. Most of the time, it doesn't. Sometimes, it even ends up damaging the rescue truck itself. That's why in real-life operations, pulling out a stuck vehicle like this always requires solid rescue experience. Here, you can see them clearing the area around. The main reason is, when the excavator starts pulling, you need to make sure the space in front of it is leveled and smooth. And in many cases, this clearing work also gives the rescue machines a solid surface to grip and push against. As I mentioned earlier, this particular rescue team, whenever they receive a mission, in real rescue missions, the first step is not rushing in with a big excavator. You don't just drag heavy equipment straight to the site. Step 1 is always send in a small vehicle with 2 or 3 people. Once they reach the scene, they make an on-site assessment. What gear is actually needed? How many vehicles are required? What's the terrain like around the site? Are there solid anchor points to pull from? Is there enough space to park several large rescue trucks? All of that needs to be checked first. Now, the site we're looking at today is relatively close to the city, with a lot of open ground nearby. But in the past, I've shared cases that happened deep in the forest along those logging roads. Those rescues are by far the toughest because you simply can't position large rescue vehicles in those narrow paths. Here, they're laying down the steel pipes, and the steel cables they prepared earlier are now being placed neatly over those pipes. By setting things up this way, when the cables are pulled tight, they won't just sink straight into the soil. The position of those steel pipes creates a kind of sloped platform for the rescue. These are the steel cables they had laid out earlier, now being straightened carefully in place. The purpose of using the excavator here isn't because people can't move a few pieces of steel. The real reason is that there's a section of heavy chain underneath, and the excavator can pull it out and stretch it straight in one move. At this point, it's not about using a huge amount of force. Just drag it into position and lay it flat. Notice how the chain is being laid out in the exact same direction as the excavator's tracks. The machine itself is still a bit twisted off axis. On this side, they're lifting a few more steel pipes, carrying them to a spot a little farther away. Now comes a very important step, digging a pit. They fill it with soil, tamping it down step by step. Because what this rescue team needs now is to set up a solid steel barrier for the operation. Next, they set up the pulley system. To attach a pulley block like this, you need a solid anchor point. If they were working inside a forest during a rescue, they would usually rely on big trees, wrapping them with special tree straps to serve as anchors. But in this situation, they dig what's called a ground anchor. The idea of a ground anchor is to lay ropes inside the pit, press them down with steel pipes, and then cover everything with soil. That way, this buried spot becomes a fixed anchor point. From there, they can attach the pulley, and once the pulley is mounted, the steel cables are threaded through. I remember sharing before about when they were doing ice rescues. On ice, there's no natural anchor point at all. So at the start, they would depend on heavy trucks or equipment to act as anchors. But since the ice surface is slippery, it's a whole different challenge. Dagilai noidong bank kung cup. Even heavy trucks and equipment can get dragged forward on the ice. At that point, the team looks for something else, usually a large ice crack. They'll use that natural crack as a fixed anchor point. When it comes to finding anchors for pulley systems, it really depends on the environment. There's no fixed rule that always works. You can't just say, "I'll always do it this way." Sometimes, when you want to dig a trench in the ground and bury an anchor, the area around you may not allow for that kind of operation. Other times, large rescue machinery simply can't get into the forest. Earlier, I saw some cases in China that people jokingly call Hulua Saves Grandpa rescues. And honestly, the reason behind these awkward rescue scenes is simple. The owners of the stranded vehicle wanted to save money when calling for help. And sure, everyone can understand that. But sometimes, cutting corners only makes things worse. Some of the rescue trucks they bring in also show a kind of blind confidence. They don't really consider the terrain or conditions on site. It's like, you call me, I'll charge right in. They assume it's just a simple pull to get the machine out. But in reality, they don't even know if they can enter the site safely. Now, the team begins setting up their operation. The main reliance is on this truck and the excavator. Together, these two vehicles create a traction point. Once the vehicles are in position, the next step is laying out the steel cables. And while laying out these cables, they must repeatedly thread them through multiple pulley blocks, which makes the workload very heavy. At this stage, what they're really dealing with is pure physics in action. Right now, the setup involves as many as 6 pulley systems. So when they are threading the steel cables, it's actually a very time-consuming and labor-intensive job. First, you pull the cable through one pulley, then walk all the way to the other side to pass it through again. And you keep repeating that process over and over. At this stage, when you're pulling the cable, Honestly, the very first pass is the easiest. After that, you have to keep shifting the steel cable bit by bit. This young guy here, they said he's a student from Kazakhstan. It's not clear whether he's just doing odd jobs here or something else. Now, you can see the steel cable along with the arrangement of pulleys. On this side, they've prepared 4 pulleys, and on the other side, 3 pulleys. That makes a total of 7 pulleys in use. Once everything is laid out, the rescue truck also comes equipped with a winch system. So the rescue truck doesn't need to move, it just stays fixed in place. But the excavator here needs to rely on its own power to pull and inch forward. Earlier, I also shared with you some cases of American-style rescues. And honestly, when you watch those cases, sometimes it really comes down to brute force. Of course, there are some that use proper technique. But many excavator rescues, especially on farms when friends come over to help, are basically just brute force operations. If one vehicle isn't enough, they add a second. If 2 aren't enough, they add a third. That's just how it goes. Now we've reached the final stage, pulling it up. Both vehicles are powering together, while someone on the excavator side directs the effort. And in fact, the role of directing begins with carefully observing the situation first. As you gradually apply force, you check whether the vehicle shows any signs of moving upward. During this kind of rescue, you must remember, as an onlooker, or even if you've already finished all the prep work, stay as far away from the cable as possible. Never gamble on that tiny chance, whether it's 1% or 1 in 10,000. If the cable snaps and whips back, if it doesn't hit anyone, that's your luck. But if it does hit, you're in serious trouble. Getting injured is the best case scenario. Sometimes it can outright cost a life. Safety here must always be the priority. And in this rescue process, you can also see why I said at the very beginning, when an excavator is stuck and you realize you cannot self-rescue, straighten the vehicle. Set it straight. That way, when the rescue team arrives, they can quickly lock onto your tracks. Keep the excavator aligned with its normal travel direction so it doesn't get stuck again. The second point, why I tell you to raise the boom of the excavator instead of letting the bucket poke straight into the mud. The reason is simple. When the rescue team pulls it upward, it won't create extra resistance. If the bucket is buried in the mud and you're unlucky enough that the machine also gets flooded, the engine section and the hydraulic system won't work properly. At that point, you'd even need to drain the hydraulic oil before you can raise the boom back up, wasting even more time. At this point, I also hope friends who enjoy the video can support with more likes, comments, follows, and saves. Now you can see the machine has already been pulled up quite a lot, and the role of those 2 steel pipes is clear. Sometimes in rescue operations, you just have to adapt to the environment and use what's available. In previous rescue cases, most of the time they relied on wood, because wood is cheap. Nowadays, they also carry these steel pipes on the truck to use as supports. But sometimes, in muddy ground or swampy areas, it's still necessary to lay down steel plates. Using steel plates, though, comes with a much higher cost, especially in swampy regions, unless the people calling for rescue had already laid some of these materials before, so they can be reused on site. In most cases, rescuers just bring wood, lay it down in swampy ground, and let the excavator move forward on it, because wood is the cheapest option. Now look at this traction setup. In the center, there's the fixed anchor point, and on both sides, 2 rows of rescue vehicles slowly tightening the steel cables. Now you can understand just how troublesome a professional rescue really is. Pulling the excavator out is not the end. They're not going to fix the excavator on site. The reason it isn't over yet is because all that equipment you set up has to be taken back down. And when you take it back, it's really only a temporary pack-up. Once you get home, you still need to unpack it all again and clean it, because now everything is covered with mud and sludge. At home, you still have to wash it clean. And for some of the steel cables, you have to oil them properly, just like maintenance. Then you also need to check the shackles to make sure they're tightened. So even after the excavator is pulled up, there's still a lot of wrap-up work left. That's all for today's video. I still hope that if you enjoyed this content, you'll support by liking, commenting, following, and saving. See you in the next episode.